You close your eyes and drift inward as I guide you gently toward the beginning of this story, and you begin to sense how everything around you, everything within you, is touched by light, not in a sudden blaze, but in a slow unfolding presence, as if the universe leans down and whispers through rays of sunlight, a whisper so ancient that it has been traveling for millions of years, crossing the dark silence of space, a silence so vast that sound itself cannot exist within it, yet the light carries its rhythm all the same, not with noise, but with a steady pulse, a flow of photons, the smallest quantum of energy, each one a messenger from the heart of the sun. And as you picture them leaving the churning, fiery core of that star, you feel their journey stretching across 93 million miles, a journey that takes about 8 minutes, a journey that feels long in distance but quick in time. And when they finally reach you here on Earth, they arrive not as intruders, but as givers of life, weaving warmth into your skin, stirring sight within your eyes, feeding every green leaf that waits quietly for morning. And you realize that to understand sunlight is to understand a cosmic thread that ties your breath to the stars. For without that steady rainfall of photons, your lungs would never have air to draw, your food would never grow, your days would never glow, and yet the light asks nothing in return except to keep moving forward, spilling its gift into the open world. You begin to imagine what a photon really is, not as a dry definition, but as a tiny bead of energy that can act both like a wave and a particle, a paradox that science accepts with a kind of humility, for light resists being fully pinned down. It moves between categories like water slipping through fingers, and this strange dual nature is part of its whisper, a reminder that not everything needs to be simplified. Some mysteries are meant to be cradled instead of solved, and so you cradle this idea as you picture photons wave, rippling across the black ocean of space, carrying energy in invisible crests and troughs, and then you picture the photon's particle, a speck leaping joyfully through emptiness, and in both forms it is free, unconfined, yet bound to the laws of physics that have guided it since the dawn of time. You let your awareness rest on the image of the sun itself, a vast sphere of plasma where hydrogen nuclei collide with such force that they fuse into helium, releasing energy in bursts of nuclear fire. And it is in this ceaseless fusion that light is born, layer after layer of glowing plasma, shaping the destiny of every planet it touches, including this one beneath your feet. And even though the sun feels so permanent, so reliable, it too is on a journey, burning through its fuel slowly, carefully, a process that will last billions of years. But for now, for you, in this brief moment, its rays are steady, spilling out like threads of golden silk. You imagine how long those photons must wander within the sun before they escape, trapped in a dense tangle of plasma, bouncing around for thousands, even millions of years, before finally breaking free into space. And when they do, they stream outward in all directions, some destined to wander forever into the interstellar void, others lucky enough to brush against Earth. And when they do, they become part of your story, because without them your body would not exist, your thoughts would not spark, your cells would not live, for sunlight is the root of energy that sustains the dance of life. You feel this truth settling into you like a soft blanket, that you are not separate from sunlight, you are shaped by it, grown out of it. Every breath of oxygen in your lungs is a signature of photosynthesis, the miracle that transforms sunlight into sugar and oxygen, feeding the web of existence. And as you breathe slowly now, you feel that whisper moving through you, reminding you of the cycles that continue whether you are awake or drifting into rest. Cycles as dependable as the dawn. You let your imagination drift to the leaves outside, maybe in a tree near your window or a memory of a forest you once walked through, and you picture the sunlight falling across those leaves, not as random brightness, but as a carefully absorbed gift caught by chlorophyll, the green pigment that acts like a net for photons, pulling them into the leaf's hidden machinery. And there, the photon's energy is stored, passed along like a note, beginning a chain of transformations that will become the sugars that nourish growth. And you recognize that this process is silent, unseen, and yet it is a heartbeat of the planet. And just as you rest now, so too the earth rests under the sun's watchful glow, turning gently in space, day after day, bringing light across its surface in an endless rhythm. You feel yourself part of that rhythm, as if your pulses sync to the turning of the earth, your breath with the rising and setting of the sun, and in this harmony, you sense a deep calm, as though the universe has designed a steady pattern to cradle you. You linger in this awareness and allow yourself to wonder about how much energy pours from the sun each second, an unimaginable torrent. Yet only a fraction touches Earth, and even that fraction is more than enough to power every life, every storm, every current of wind and water, every flicker of flame, every heartbeat. And this abundance humbles you, for it shows how generous the cosmos is, spilling energy across space in endless supply. You recall that the ancient civilizations before you also felt this awe, worshipping the sun as a god, as a source of order and time, for its rising and setting marked the rhythm of life. And even though you may no longer bow to it, you still depend upon it just as deeply, and the science that explains it only deepens its wonder, for knowing the physics does not dim the poetry, it amplifies it, showing you how precise, how delicate, how interconnected this light really is. You drift further into the thought that each photon, when it meets your skin, warms you not because of magic, but because its energy transfers into the molecules of your body, making them vibrate, and vibration is warmth, and warmth is comfort. And so the sun comforts you in the most direct way possible, not through metaphor, but through physical touch at a distance. You smile softly at this idea, and the whisper of sunlight grows louder in your awareness, not as a sound, but as a presence, as if you can hear the quiet hum of the cosmos behind it. You begin to consider that every color you see is also sunlight, for color is simply the way your eyes interpret different wavelengths of photons, the reds and oranges with longer, lazier waves, the blues and violets with tighter, quicker ones, and when they blend together, you see the full spectrum, the rainbow that hides within every beam of light, waiting to be revealed when raindrops scatter across the sky. You imagine yourself under such a rainbow now, lying quietly as its arch glows above you, and you realize that what you're seeing is sunlight divided into its secret voices, each color a separate note in a great cosmic chord, and you rest inside that chord like a listener held within music. The thought eases you further into calmness, and you let your mind wander toward the question of why sunlight feels so deeply tied to mood, how on cloudy days your spirit feels different than on bright ones, how sunlight seems to awaken not only plants but also you, stirring chemicals in your brain, nudging your circadian rhythm, reminding your body when to rise and when to rest, and so even your sleep tonight is linked to the sun, for your internal clock was set by it long before electricity lit your room. You breathe slowly again and realize that everything you are, from your heartbeat to your vision to your emotions, carries the imprint of the sun's whisper. And so, when you listen to sunlight, you're listening to yourself, to your origins, to the quiet truth that life is a pattern woven from photons. You let this settle over you as gently as evening light, and you wonder, just for a moment, what it means for life to have such dependence on this single star, what it means for plants to have evolved such a delicate yet powerful way of capturing photons, and how humanity, in its curiosity, now seeks to follow the same path, to catch sunlight not with leaves but with silicon and nanostructures, to learn from the whisper and translate it into power. But that story is for later, and for now, you remain with the whisper itself, feeling how it threads into every moment of existence, soft, steady, eternal, and as your eyes grow heavier, you drift into the thought of what comes next. If light is the messenger, then what message does it carry when it enters the green alchemy of leaves? And how does that message become the very breath you now take? You breathe slowly, your mind still touched by the whisper of sunlight, and now you begin to follow that light as it touches the world of leaves, where a quiet alchemy unfolds, a transformation so constant and yet so easily overlooked that you may pass trees and grasses every day without realizing that within each one, a miracle of chemistry is taking place, a miracle so patient, so delicate, and yet so powerful that it has shaped the course of life itself. For when light meets green, something begins, something that turns emptiness into substance, breath into food, light into life. And this process, called photosynthesis, is less like a machine and more like a slow meditation carried out by the planet's green skin, an act of balance and generosity. And as you imagine it now, you see the leaf not as a flat surface, but as a window into a hidden world, a labyrinth of cells filled with chloroplasts, tiny green chambers where the true magic happens, and each chloroplast holds pigments, especially chlorophyll, pigments that act like receptive ears, tuned perfectly to the frequencies of sunlight, especially red and blue, while reflecting green, which is why leaves shine with their familiar color. And these pigments are like nets catching photons, tiny bursts of energy, pulling them into the molecular dance. And when a photon is caught, Its energy jolts an electron into motion, a spark that begins a cascade of changes. And this spark is never wasted. It is carefully handed from, molecule to molecule, like a secret passed along in whispers, until it drives the splitting of water, separating it into oxygen and hydrogen, and from that moment the leaf is no longer just absorbing sunlight. It is reshaping it, turning immaterial light into tangible matter. And as you let your imagination settle on this, you sense how profound it is that a leaf can take something invisible and untouchable and turn it into sugar, into wood, into fruit, into food that nourishes animals, and into oxygen that fills your lungs. And this gentle act happens everywhere around you, on every blade of grass, every patch of moss, every great canopy of rainforest. The same rhythm repeating endlessly, a chorus of green alchemists at work. And the more you feel into this, the more you recognize that photosynthesis is not only a chemical process, but also a story of generosity. For the leaf does not keep the sugar and oxygen for itself. It shares, it offers, it gives away what it makes, becoming the foundation upon which entire ecosystems rise. You picture yourself shrinking down, drifting inward until you're small enough to see inside the leaf, walking along the internal corridors of its tissue, where veins carry water up from the roots and carbon dioxide slips in through tiny pores called stomata, which open and close like gentle breaths. And here in the inner light, chloroplasts rest like emerald jewels, thousands of them within a single cell, and each one is a microcosm of creation, filled with thylakoid membranes stacked like coins where the light reactions occur. And as you float there in imagination, you watch photons being caught, electrons leaping, water molecules splitting apart, oxygen bubbling away like a silent sigh, while the energy harvested is transformed into molecules called ADP and NADPH, carriers of energy, waiting to be used in the next step, the dark reactions, which are not truly dark but independent of light, where the famous Calvin cycle patiently assembles carbon atoms into glucose, a sugar that holds the sun's energy in a stable, storable form. And this sugar becomes a building block for life, feeding not only the plant itself, but everything that consumes it. And so, from this quiet alchemy, the web of life is spun. You allow this vision to wash over you, feeling the balance and the patience of it, the way photosynthesis unites the elements, sunlight from the star, water from the soil, carbon dioxide from the air, all combined within the leaf's green chamber. And the result is both nourishment and breath, both food and oxygen, both energy and structure. And in this way, the leaf is like a bridge between the immaterial and the material, between the sky and the earth, and you, in your own body, are tied to that bridge. For every bite you take and every breath you draw carries the signature of photosynthesis. You remember that the air around you is filled with 21% oxygen, a balance sustained only because of photosynthesis, and without it, the oxygen would be consumed by respiration and fire until none remained. And so the presence of oxygen itself is proof of this ancient alchemy, a gift that plants and algae and cyanobacteria have been offering for billions of years, long before you, long before any animal walked the earth. And as you think of this immense timeline, you realize that the world of green is older than you can fathom, stretching back to the first cyanobacteria in ancient oceans, who learned to split water and release oxygen, a change so radical it transformed the atmosphere, paving the way for complex life. And so when you see a leaf today, you're not only seeing the present, but also the memory of deep time, the echo of an innovation that changed the fate of the planet. You breathe slowly again, sensing gratitude rising within you. Gratitude not only for the comfort of air, but for the quiet labor of leaves, who never ask for thanks, who simply open themselves to light and continue their work. You let yourself imagine the scale of it. Entire rainforests as vast lungs, oceans filled with phytoplankton, invisible yet abundant, together making more than half of the oxygen you breathe. A partnership between land and sea, tree and wave, microbe and forest, all engaged in the same act of alchemy. And you, with every breath, are a participant in their cycle, exhaling carbon dioxide that plants will take in, inhaling oxygen that plants have released, a partnership so intimate you might call it a form of conversation, a conversation you join without words, simply by breathing. You begin to notice how the process is rhythmic, how the opening and closing of stomata, the capturing of light, the flow of water, all echo the rhythms of your own body. Your inhale and exhale, your pulse and rest, and you see in this rhythm a kind of meditative wisdom, that life flourishes not by rushing but by cycles, by steady repetitions, by balance between light and dark, day and night, growth and rest. And as you reflect on this, you feel your own pace slowing, your thoughts aligning with the gentle persistence of photosynthesis, a process that has no haste, no urgency, only steady presence. You recall that scientists call conversion of carbon dioxide into sugar carbon fixation, and though the term may sound technical, you understand it now as a story of anchoring, of taking something invisible, drifting, intangible, and fixing it into something you can hold, taste, eat, something that becomes the sweetness of fruit, the strength of wood, the starch of grain, and you realize that everything solid around you, every tree trunk, every apple, every slice of bread, began as invisible carbon floating in the air, captured and transformed by green alchemy. And this realization deepens your sense of wonder, for it means that you, too, are built from air, that your body is constructed from carbon that once drifted as gas, stitched into your form by the quiet labor plants long before you ever breathed. You let this truth sink in, feeling the connection between your lungs and the leaves outside, between your blood and the sap that flows through stems, between your breath tonight and the ancient cycles of the earth. And in this connection you find comfort, a reassurance that you belong within the web of life, that you are not separate but woven into its fabric, just as the sugars made in leaves flow into fruits, and the fruits into animals, and eventually into you. You pause in this meditation and picture a tree again, its canopy spread wide, catching sunlight on thousands of leaves, and within each one, chloroplasts continue to work silently, tirelessly, and you imagine a tree as a vast solar panel, but unlike a human-built panel. It not only captures energy, but also builds itself, repairs itself, reproduces itself, and shares its products freely, a model of efficiency and generosity that inspires scientists today to mimic its processes, to design solar technologies that might one day rival the leaf in elegance. And you realize that humanity's attempts to build better solar cells are, in a sense, an homage to this ancient green alchemy. You let your thoughts drift now, floating like light itself, toward the larger implications of this process, how photosynthesis not only sustains life, but also shapes climate, drawing carbon dioxide out of the air, regulating the atmosphere, balancing the energy of the planet. And though the balance is delicate and can be disturbed, the persistence of photosynthesis offers hope, a reminder that the earth is resilient, that cycles of renewal are always possible if they are respected. You close your eyes a little more deeply and feel this as reassurance, that even as the world changes, the leaves still turn toward light, the algae still bloom in the sea, the whisper of photosynthesis continues, offering life again and again. You sink into this calm, and as you do, your thoughts gently prepare to turn toward what comes next. For if photosynthesis is a making of oxygen and sugar, then what is the story of oxygen itself? How did this breath become the atmosphere you rely on? How did the planet itself become alive with air? And how is every breath you take still a continuation of that ancient transformation? You rest more deeply now, your awareness still carrying the quiet glow of green alchemy. And as you drift into the next chapter of this journey, you begin to notice the air itself, the invisible ocean that surrounds you, a substance so familiar that you rarely pause to think of it. And yet without it, no breath would rise, no fire would burn, no life as you know it will unfold. And this air, this atmosphere, is not something that has always existed in its current form. It is something that was made, shaped, transformed by the patient work of photosynthesis over billions of years, until it became what you now draw into your lungs with every inhale. And so when you breathe tonight, you're not only taking in oxygen, you're taking in history, you are taking in the breath of the planet itself. You begin by picturing the Earth long ago, in its early days, when the atmosphere was different, heavy with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, methane, and other gases, a sky that would have felt alien to you, lacking the oxygen you now depend upon, a sky under which no complex animals could survive, a sky where the oceans were the true cradles of life, filled with tiny microbes that learned, through trial and error, to use sunlight for energy. And among these microbes were the cyanobacteria, the first great oxygen makers, who discovered the secret of splitting water, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. And though their presence was microscopic, their effect was monumental. For over millions of years, their constant labor began to shift the balance of the atmosphere, filling it slowly with oxygen until the planet itself began to breathe. You feel into the patience of this transformation, for it did not happen quickly. It was not a sudden change, but a long, steady unfolding, so gradual that it is almost beyond human imagination, yet powerful enough that it altered the very chemistry of the oceans and skies, triggering what scientists call the Great Oxidation Event, a moment in Earth's history more than 2 billion years ago when oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere for the first time, and with it, the course of evolution was forever redirected. You imagine this moment not as a sudden flash, but as a rising tide, oxygen slowly seeping into the seas, binding with minerals, rusting iron to bands of stone that can still be seen today, leaving a geological memory of that ancient change, and eventually spilling into the sky, where it lingered, grew, and finally reached levels that allowed complex life to breathe. You realize now that oxygen is not just a gas, not just something you inhale unconsciously. It is the silent gift of countless generations of microscopic life, a gift that has been renewed ever since by plants, algae, and all the green alchemists of the world. And you feel humbled to know that each breath you take is connected to this ancient legacy. You let yourself sink deeper into this thought, feeling how oxygen is not only abundant but also active, how it fuels the very process of respiration in your cells, entering your bloodstream, carried by hemoglobin, delivered to tissues where it helps to unlock energy from the sugars plants created. And in this sense, every breath you take is a partnership, an exchange. Plants give you oxygen, you give them carbon dioxide. And this cycle continues endlessly, a rhythm as constant as the rising and setting of the sun. You notice how your own breathing now feels slower, deeper, calmer, and you see in a reflection of this planetary exchange, as if your lungs are small mirrors of the great lungs of Earth, inhaling and exhaling in harmony with forests and oceans. You picture the Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the planet, though in truth it is part of a much larger network, where plants and plankton together maintain the oxygen balance, and you see the vast canopies of trees stretching like green waves, each leaf releasing tiny bubbles of oxygen into the air, while far away, in the oceans, phytoplankton drift in sunlit waters, producing even more oxygen, invisible to the eye yet essential to life, and together, land and sea form a breathing system that embraces you with every inhale. You imagine shrinking down into a single breath, following oxygen molecules as they enter your nose, flow through your airways, sink into the alveoli of your lungs, cross into your blood, and travel to your cells, where they meet the sugars made by plants. And in tiny organelles called mitochondria, the sugars are broken down, releasing energy that powers every thought, every heartbeat, every step, and in the process, carbon dioxide is made, carried back to your lungs, and exhaled, where it floats out into the air, waiting to be drawn into a leaf once more. And so the cycle closes, not as a single event, but as a continuous circle that links you to the green world. You reflect that this circle is not yours alone. It is shared by every creature that breathes, by animals in the forest, by fish in the sea, by birds in the sky. And this shared breath is perhaps the most intimate connection among all life. For though you may never meet these creatures, you breathe the same oxygen, you share the same planetary exhale, and in this way, you are never separate, always part of the whole. You pause here, letting this realization ease you into deeper calm, and you consider how fragile this balance is, how dependent oxygen levels are on the health of ecosystems, how deforestation or pollution can shift the balance. And yet you also feel reassured by the resilience of photosynthesis, by the way life has endured through cataclysms and changes, always returning to this cycle of breath. You breathe in again, slower now, and imagine that with each inhale you're drawing not only oxygen but also history, the breath of ancient forests, the exhale of long-gone animals, the whisper of cyanobacteria from billions of years ago, all carried forward through time to this moment where it sustains you. You let this awareness become a meditation. Breath in, breath out, a rhythm that ties the earth itself. And as you drift deeper into this rhythm, you realize that oxygen is also the key to fire, that it fuels not only life but flame, that every candle flicker, every hearth, every wildfire, every star even, depends on the presence of oxygen or its cosmic equivalents. And in this way, breath and flame are twin expressions of the same truth. Energy unlocked through oxidation, energy that has carried life and civilization forward. You smile softly at the thought that the same gas filling your lungs is also the gas that lets fire burn, that light a match and inhale deeply are both act of oxygen. And in this you see again the unity of all things, the way the planet breathes not only through lungs and leaves, but also through sparks and flames. You drift back now to the forests, the oceans, the vast biosphere exhaling oxygen and endless generosity, and you feel yourself a part of this generosity, not outside it, but within it, and the comfort of this realization eases you further toward rest. You wonder gently what it means that this breath, this oxygen, this planetary exhale, is also the foundation of your own awareness, for without it, neurons cannot fire, thoughts cannot form, and so even your act of wondering is powered by photosynthesis, by the breath of the planet, and this thought humbles you, softens you, and deepens your sense of belonging. You sense now that you are ready to drift onward, that the whisper of sunlight and the green alchemy of leaves have led you to this breath, and that the breath itself leads you further into the hidden workings of light inside the leaf, into the molecular dance of chloroplasts and pigments, into the story of how light is captured and shared. And so as your breathing steadies and your body grows heavy with calm, you let your last thought for this chapter be a question. Carry like a seed into the next. How does light, once caught, move through the leaf? How does it become the energy of life? And what hidden elegance lies within? The quiet machinery of photosynthesis itself? You breathe slowly now, resting in the awareness that your lungs carry the planet's exhale. And as you drift further, you begin to imagine not just the air around you, but the hidden interiors of the leaves themselves, where the delicate machinery of life unfolds in silence. And here the story becomes more intricate, more intimate, for this is a place where light is not only received but transformed, caught like a precious drop of rain, and then passed along through invisible pathways. And this chapter, this gentle unfolding, is about the way light is captured and then shared, the way energy flows from the sun into the living tissue of the earth, and then outward into every creature, including you, so that even now as you listen, the thoughts in your mind are lit by the memory of photons that once touched the leaf. You close your eyes a little more, picturing the leaf not as a simple surface, but as a labyrinth of cells, and within them, chloroplasts glimmer softly like emerald lanterns, each one holding a network of membranes called thylakoids, stacked into grana, arranged like coins or discs, shimmering in the soft green glow. And within these membranes, pigments rest, molecules such as chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, carotenoids too, each tuned to catch certain wavelengths of sunlight, each like a string, on an instrument plucked by photons. And when a photon strikes, it is absorbed, and its energy jolts an electron into a higher state, awakening a flow of energy that begins a symphony of photosynthesis. You imagine these pigments as dancers standing in a circle, passing along energy from one to the next until it reaches a special pair, the reaction center, where the energy is transformed into motion, into the actual transfer of electrons. And this is the heart of the light reactions, the place where captured sunlight becomes current, flowing like an invisible river through proteins embedded in the membrane. You let your imagination linger on photosystem 2, the first of these great complexes, shaped like an ancient temple of molecules, where photons fall like offerings, and here water is split, yielding oxygen, protons, and electrons. The oxygen released into the air as a breath. The protons gather in the thylakoid space, the electrons beginning their journey along the electron transport chain. And this journey is not hurried, but deliberate. Each electron passes from one protein to another, releasing energy step by step, energy that is used to pump protons, building a gradient, a tension across the membrane, like water behind a dam. You feel this tension rising, and you know that soon it will be released, not destructively but constructively, through ADP synthase, a molecular turbine that spins as protons flow through it, capturing the potential energy and storing in ADP, the universal energy currency of life. And you marvel at this, for it means that every movement you make, every heartbeat, every thought, is powered by these tiny spinning turbines, by the conversion of sunlight into chemical currency. You drift further, imagining photosystem I, where electrons re-energized by another photon are passed along again, finally reducing NADP plus to NADPH, a molecule that carries high-energy electrons, ready to fuel the next stage of photosynthesis. You let yourself rest in the image of the system. Photons falling like golden rain, electrons flow like a river, protons moving like a tide, turbines spinning silently, energy being captured, stored, and shared, all within the quiet green chamber of a chloroplast. You recognize that this sharing does not end at the leaf, that the ADP and NADPH produced here go on to power the Calvin cycle, which builds sugars, and those sugars leave the leaf, flowing into stems, fruits, roots, and eventually into animals, into you, so that what began as a photon becomes, step by step, the strength in your muscles, the warmth in your skin, the thought in your mind. You reflect on how intricate this process is, how elegant, how finely tuned, and yet it has been occurring for billions of years without pause, without conscious thought, without design beyond the slow sculpting of evolution. And you find comfort in that, knowing that life is sustained by processes so reliable and so generous that they simply continue, whether you notice them or not. You breathe again, imagining energy flowing outward like ripples from a leaf, feeding the ecosystem, sustaining chains of life. And you realize that nothing keeps the energy. Everything passes along, from photon to electron, from sugar to cell, from plant to animal, from breath to breath. And in this endless sharing, you see a model for existence itself. Not hoarding but circulating, not clinging but flowing, not ending but transforming. You pause here, resting the rhythm of this flow, and you let yourself wonder, if this is how light moves through life, then what other hidden movements await your awareness? What other transformations lie within the quiet machinery of the planet, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be honored, as you drift gently into the story of how matter itself becomes crystalline and alive with energy? As you prepare to step into the tale of silicon and solar cells, the human attempt to mirror the elegance of the leaf, to build crystals of power that hum with light. You drift now from the green chambers of leaves into another kind of light catcher, one not grown in silence on branches, but forged by human hands. And you begin to imagine how we too, inspired by the alchemy of photosynthesis, have learned to harvest sunlight, not through pigments and living cells, but through crystals, through carefully arranged lattices of silicon that shimmer like frozen fragments of starlight. And here the story turns toward technology, though it remains a gentle continuation of nature's theme, for silicon itself is born from the earth, from sand, from the ancient crust that once formed under oceans and volcanoes. And so, even in this, the work of humans is tied to planet's deep memory. And you picture grains of sand, so ordinary on a beach, yet within them lies the potential to become solar cells, to become windows through which sunlight is caught and translated into electricity. And you feel awe in this, because it means that even the simplest materials hold hidden capacities, waiting for discovery, waiting for transformation. You close your eyes and see the process more clearly. Silicon melted, purified, shaped into long crystals, sliced into wafers so thin and precise that they gleam like mirrors, and when arranged together, they form the surface of a solar cell, a surface tuned to the arrival of photons, just as pigments in a leaf are tuned. And when a photon strikes the silicon, it frees an electron, knocking it loose from its place, and this electron, no longer bound, begins to move, and its movement is current, electricity itself, the same force that lights your room, charges your devices, and flows invisibly through wires across cities. And you realize that what the leaf does with chemistry, the solar cell does with physics, both capturing light and turning it into energy that sustains life in different ways. You linger on this idea that the human attempt to catch sunlight is not separate from nature, but an echo of it, that in making solar panels we are not competing with the leaf, but learning from it, following its quiet lessons, building our own crystalline forests of silicon that stand in deserts, on rooftops, across fields, all facing the sun, all absorbing its gifts, and though they lack the softness of leaves, they hum with a similar purpose, to turn light into power. You feel how remarkable it is that this process, discovered in the 19th century as the photovoltaic effect, has now grown into vast solar farms that glimmer across landscapes, reflecting the sky. And you picture them as artificial meadows, mechanical leaves stretching out to the horizon, catching sunlight with tireless patience. You let your thoughts wander further into physics, gently, without hurry, how silicon forms a lattice, how impurities are added, boron on one side, phosphorus on the other, to create a junction, a boundary where electrons and holes separate. And this separation is what makes current flow when light enters. And though the words may sound technical, you imagine it simply as a doorway, a threshold, where light opens a path for electrons to walk. And as they walk, they create the stream we call electricity, a river of charge that can be guided, stored, and used, flowing outward into the world just as sugars flow outward from a leaf. You realize that in both cases, sunlight is not hoarded but shared, transformed into a form that others can use. whether it's glucose feeding animals or current lighting homes. And this recognition softens your perception of technology, letting you see it not as cold or separate, but as another form of participation in the great cycle of energy. You let yourself feel the difference too. The leaf, self-repairing, living, endlessly complex, compared with the solar cell, fragile, rigid, dependent on human care, and yet you sense no rivalry here, only complementarity, for the planet needs both the forest and the panels, the chloroplasts and the silicon lattices, to weave a sustainable future. You rest in this awareness, picturing the earth as a sphere glowing with both green and silver patches, living leaves and crystalline fields, together turning sunlight into energy, together forming a bridge between star and society. You drift deeper into this vision, your breath slowing, your body heavier, and you feel gratitude that human beings have been able to listen to the whisper of sunlight, to follow its clues, to learn from it, and to build crystals that sing the same song of light. You wonder softly what more we might yet learn, what other ways light might be captured and shared, and you sense that this question will guide you forward into the history of attempts to mimic photosynthesis itself, to not only copy its results, but to reproduce its elegance, its chemistry, its patient alchemy. And so as you rest now and hum a crystalline power, your last thought in this chapter is a gentle curiosity. If silicon can echo the leaf in physics, what would it mean to echo the leaf in chemistry? To build machines that breathe sunlight and water into fuel, as nature has always done? You rest deeper now. Your mind still glows with the image of crystalline fields shimmering under the dawn, and as you sink further into this gentle narration, you begin to imagine how human curiosity has always been drawn not only to mimic, but to replicate, not only to capture light with silicon, but to imitate the very chemistry of leaves, to build machines that could perform the ancient green alchemy itself. And this longing gave rise to the first attempts at artificial photosynthesis. A journey filled with patience, with struggle, with both failure and hope, and you see it not as a cold scientific race, but as a meditative unfolding, humanity leaning close to nature's secrets, listening carefully, experimenting gently, trying again and again to unlock the code of life's most important transformation. You picture the story beginning in the laboratories of the mid-20th century, when scientists first asked themselves whether they could split water using light, just as plants do, whether they could design a device that would absorb photons and release oxygen, hydrogen, and stored energy. And though the tools were crude compared to today's, the questions were clear, and the first experiments revealed how delicate this balance was, how easily the reactions failed, how stubbornly water resisted being split without the intricate enzymes and pigments perfected by evolution. You imagine the scientists at their benches, sunlight or lamps shining into beakers, electrodes dipped into solutions, bubbles rising slowly, and each bubble a small sign that perhaps the secret could be approached, that perhaps one day an artificial leaf could be made. You drift further into the history, recalling that in the 1970s, two Japanese scientists, Akira Fujishima and Kenichi Honda, discovered something extraordinary. When they illuminated a titanium dioxide electrode submerged in water, they observed oxygen forming at one side and hydrogen at the other, a process now called the Honda-Fujishima effect, the birth of photoelectrochemistry. And though this system was inefficient, though it captured only a tiny fraction of sunlight's potential, it was proof that the principle was possible, that water could indeed be split by light using human-made materials. You linger on this moment, seeing it as a turning point, the first spark of possibility, the first clear echo of photosynthesis in the language of technology, and you imagine how inspiring that must have felt, how hopeful, even if the efficiency was low. You let your thoughts drift to later decades, when researchers began designing catalysts, molecules, or metals that could speed up the reactions, imitating the role of enzymes like photosystem II in plants. And each catalyst was like a new attempt to carve a key for the lock of water's bonds. Some made of noble metals like platinum or ruthenium, expensive and rare. Others of earth-abundant materials like cobalt or iron, cheaper but less effective. And the search itself became a meditation on balance, cost versus efficiency, stability versus fragility, nature's perfection versus human invention. You breathe slowly and picture the idea of an artificial leaf, a device envisioned by chemists like Daniel Nocera, who in the early 2000s developed a cobalt phosphate catalyst that could split water when placed on a silicon surface, a device that, when exposed to sunlight, bubbled oxygen and hydrogen like a living leaf, and though it was still far from the efficiency of plants, it carried symbolic weight, showing that humanity was learning to listen more closely to the language of chloroplasts. You see the artificial leaf not as a competitor to nature, but as a student and apprentice, imitating the teacher's gestures, stumbling but persistent, and you feel tenderness of this effort for the way science, like life itself, advances through trial, error, and patience. You let your imagination wander into the delicate details of these experiments, electrodes shimmering within films, semiconductors tuned to absorb certain wavelengths, catalysts patterned across surfaces like jewelry, water molecules drawn close, bonds stretched and broken by absorbed photons, oxygen released into the air, hydrogen collected as fuel, and you realize that these attempts, however imperfect, were planting seeds for the future, seed that might one day grow into a technology capable of sustaining societies as generously as leaves sustain ecosystems. You pause here, letting your breath settle, and you reflect on how remarkable it is that humans, creatures who breathe oxygen made by plants, who eat sugars made by photosynthesis, would one day try to recreate the very process that gave them life, as if reaching back to source, as if acknowledging that the wisdom of nature is the blueprint for survival. You feel the humility of his realization, that technology is not an escape from nature, but an echo of it, that progress is not about surpassing a leaf, but about learning from it, listening more deeply to its whisper. You breathe again, slowly, and imagine the laboratory continuing their quiet work even now, experiments running, materials tested, catalysts designed, each one part of the long meditation that is artificial photosynthesis, and you recognize that the story is not finished, that it continues in the present, that each step, each discovery, each failure carries the same question forward. How can we learn to catch light and store it as fuel? Just as a leaf has always done, you rest in this question, knowing that it leads naturally to the next chapter, where the quiet beginnings of laboratory experiments bloom into a wider solar revolution, where panels and leaves, crystals and catalysts spread across the world. And so as you drift toward rest, you let your last thought be a gentle one. What would it mean for entire societies to breathe with the rhythm of the sun, to live within the cycle of light and energy that nature has always known? You breathe more deeply now, held in the rhythm of discovery, and as the story carries you forward, you see how the quiet beginnings of artificial photosynthesis, the delicate experiments of laboratories, join with the shimmering fields of silicon crystals to spark something larger, something that spread far beyond beakers and wafers, something that transformed landscapes and skylines. The solar revolution, a moment in human history, when light itself became not just a source of warmth or food, but a primary pillar of civilization's power. And as you picture this, you feel no urgency, only a slow unfolding, as if the world itself turned toward the sun with new awareness, realizing that the energy falling freely from the sky each day was more than enough to meet the needs of billions, more than enough to sustain societies, if only it could be caught, stored, and shared wisely. You imagine rooftops first, one by one, shimmering with panels, small mechanical leaves soaking in sunlight, each home a little ecosystem of energy, each family receiving photons directly. And then you imagine entire deserts transformed into oceans of glass and silicon, panels aligned like orderly crops, harvesting sunlight with precision that echoes the fields of grain beside them. And from above, these deserts look like lakes of blue light, reflecting the sky. And you see that this, too, is agriculture of a kind. But instead of food, it is energy. Instead of feeding stomachs, it feeds cities. And this recognition softens the boundary between technology and nature, showing them as partners in the same story. You drift further into this vision, seeing nations building vast solar farms, miles of panels turning toward the sun. And you notice how the rhythm of the day becomes the rhythm of the grid, how energy flows most strongly when light is brightest, and how storage becomes the next-gen puzzle, batteries and fuels waiting to be filled with captured photons, so that the night may also be lit by the memory of day. You breathe slowly, feeling how this revolution is not sudden but patient, just as photosynthesis itself is patient, spreading steadily across the globe, and you reflect on the symbolism of it. Humanity choosing to align itself more closely with the rhythms of the sun, stepping away from the buried sunlight of fossil fuels, the compressed remains of ancient forests, and turning instead to the living light that falls fresh each morning, a renewal rather than a depletion, a giving rather than a taking. You pause here, letting this awareness calm you, and you consider how even cities now shimmer with panels, how glass skyscrapers glint with embedded photovoltaics, how cars carry solar skins, how lamps and pumps in villages far from grids hum with solar power. And you see in this a quiet democratization of energy, a sharing that spreads not only across wires but across lives, giving more people access to light, to power, to opportunity. You let your thoughts wander to science again, gently, recalling how efficiency has grown, how new materials beyond silicon, perovskites, thin films, organic cells, promise even lighter, cheaper, more versatile ways of catching photons. And you imagine them layered onto windows, woven into fabrics, sprayed onto surfaces, making every object potential leaf, every surface a harvester, and the world itself a vast solar garden. You feel wonder at this, and yet you sense that the revolution is not merely technical, but spiritual, a reorientation toward the generosity of the cosmos, an acknowledgement that the sun has always been enough, that it has always offered more energy in an hour than humanity uses in a year, and the task is not to conquer but to align, not to dominate but to receive, not to exhaust but to circulate. You drift into quiet hope of this thought, feeling how peaceful it is to imagine societies that rise and rest more fully with the sun, that let their patterns harmonize with light instead of fighting against it. And you realize that this revolution, though imperfect, though still unfolding, is already a shift in consciousness, a remembering that the whisper of sunlight is the root of all power, all breath, all life. You breathe again, slow and steady, and let your body grow heavier with calm. And as you rest in this awareness, you feel the story beginning to turn again toward the deeper question. If leaves are the teachers and silicon their echo, what else can be learned from nature's blueprint? What other lessons lie within the delicate balance of chlorophyll and pigments, waiting for human dreams to borrow? And so you let the chapter close softly on this thought, drifting into curiosity about how nature's elegance inspires human design, and how the next step in this journey is to look back at leaves not only as symbols, but as blueprints, not only as givers, but as guides. You breathe gently now. Carry with you the glow of crystalline fields and the shimmer of a solar revolution, and as you settle deeper, you begin to sense how human eyes turn back again and again toward nature, not only to admire its beauty, but to learn from its designs, for within the veins of leaves, the spirals of shells, the wings of birds, and the balance of ecosystems lies a library of solutions patiently written by evolution over billions of years. And this is the story of biomimicry, the art of listening to nature's blueprint and translating it into human dreams, a story that unfolds quietly like the opening of a flower, reminding you that every invention is, in some way, a remembering of something nature has already shown. You picture a leaf again, not simply as a patch of green, but as a living solar panel perfected over deep time, so efficient that it repairs itself, reproduces itself, and shares its products freely. And you imagine scientists leaning close to this blueprint, tracing the pathways of chlorophyll, the organization of thylakoids, the way electrons are passed with such precision, and from this study new ideas emerge. Artificial pigments that catch more of the spectrum, nanostructures that mimic the ridges of leaves, materials that copy the water-shedding cuticle on the surface. All attempts to borrow the wisdom of a system that has been quietly successful for ages. You allow your mind to drift to other blueprints in nature, the way a lotus leaf repels water with microscopic bumps, inspiring self-cleaning surfaces, the way a butterfly's wing reflects iridescent color through nanostructures, inspiring more efficient solar coatings, the way desert beetles collect water from fog, inspire materials that harvest moisture. And you realize that all of these, though not directly photosynthesis, are related by the same theme, that nature does not waste, does not overbuild, does not separate beauty from function. And these lessons hum like a melody beneath human invention. You breathe more slowly, imagining yourself as a student in this classroom of the earth, learning not from books but from leaves, from shells, from feathers, from roots, each design a page and a manual that has no author but time itself. And you sense how humbling this is, that every skyscraper, every machine, every panel of glass is still young compared to the wisdom of a leaf, that to learn is not to dominate but to apprentice, to listen with patience. You drift further and picture a dream of cities inspired by forests, buildings that photosynthesize, walls that breathe, windows that harvest light, streets designed like river deltas to channel air and water. Economies that cycle resources the way ecosystems do, with no waste, only transformation. And as you imagine this, your body softens, for the vision is not harsh or mechanical, but alive, organic, gentle, a harmony between human structures and natural rhythms. You reflect softly that this is not fantasy but possibility, that already materials called perovskites, inspired by mineral structures, promise solar efficiencies greater than silicon, that dye-sensitized solar cells, modeled after chlorophyll, use organic pigments to capture light, that researchers dream of flexible panels woven into clothing, panels that act like artificial leaves, breathing energy into daily life. And you see that these are not just devices, but translations, interpretations of the blueprint into human language. You let your thoughts linger on this word, translation, for nature speaks in molecules and genes, in structures and flows, while humans speak in circuits and metals, yet both languages are about solving the same needs, capturing energy, building structures, sustaining balance. And in this recognition you find comfort, as though technology and nature are not enemies but two dialects of the same story. You breathe again, deeper, and imagine your own body as part of this blueprint, your lungs mirroring the branching of trees, your veins echoing the rivers, your neurons branching like roots, and you realize that even you are an invention of nature, already carrying its wisdom, already reflecting its patterns. And so to dream of technologies that mimic nature is also to dream of returning to yourself, of aligning your life more closely with the design you already embody. You rest in this thought, letting it soothe you, and you sense that this chapter, though about science, is also about humility, about recognizing that progress does not always mean moving away from the natural world, but often means moving closer to it, remembering its lessons, learning its rhythms, listening more deeply to its whispers. You close your eyes further and see a world where solar cells are not separate from the environment but part of it, designed to blend with landscapes, designed to give as much as they take. And you realize that the dream is not only efficiency but harmony, not only energy but balance, not only invention but remembrance. You linger here, breathing slowly, and as your body sinks heavier into calm, you feel the narrative preparing to shift again, to move from the dreams drawn from nature's blueprints into practical challenge of storing sunlight, of not only catching photons, but saving them, holding them for the dark, just as plants do when they split water and store energy as fuel. And so, as you drift toward the next chapter, your last thought here is a gentle one. If the leaf has shown us how to dream, then what does it teach us about storage, about holding the sun in matter, about keeping the whisper of light alive through the night? You rest more deeply now, carried gently from the dream of nature's blueprints into a more focused vision. And as your breath slows, you begin to imagine a challenge that has always followed the catching of light, the puzzle of holding it, of saving the sun's gift for when the sky grows dark. And here the story turns to the secret that plants have long mastered, the act of splitting water and storing energy, a process so subtle yet so profound that it sustains the rhythm of night and day, growth and rest. And now humanity too seeks to follow this path, to learn how to keep sunlight not just in the moment but in matter itself, in fuels that can be carried, shared, and used when the sun is absent. You picture a leaf again, and within it, the green machinery of photosystem 2, where light strikes and electrons leap, where water molecules are gently but relentlessly torn apart, their bonds broken by the energy of photons, releasing oxygen into the air, protons into the inner chamber, and electrons into the chain of reactions. And in this quiet tearing lies the secret. Hydrogen and oxygen separated, one carrying the fuel of life, the other the breath of animals. And you realize that this is not destruction but transformation, not violence but liberation, freeing the elements to take new forms, to carry the sun's energy forward. You drift further into this thought, sensing how plants then use the stored energy, converting carbon dioxide into sugars, making fuel that lasts, fuel that can be used in the dark, fuel that is stable. And you recognize how remarkable this is, how much wisdom is hidden in this act, and you understand why scientists today dream of imitating it, of building devices that can split water using sunlight, creating hydrogen gas that can be collected, stored, and later burned or fed into fuel cells, releasing energy without smoke, without carbon, only with water returning to the cycle. You let yourself picture such a device, sometimes called an artificial leaf, a small panel shimmering in water, sunlight falling across it, Tiny bubbles rising as oxygen and hydrogen drift upward, invisible fuel being made in silence, and you feel awe that something so simple to the eye could hold such transformative power. You breathe more slowly, imagining how entire societies might one day use this principle. Solar reactors spread across fields and rooftops, producing clean hydrogen as easily as leaves produce sugar, fueling cars, planes, cities, not with oil drawn from ancient fossils, but with light falling fresh each day. And this vision softens you, for it shows a path of harmony, of alignment with the cycles of Earth, rather than extraction from its depths. You reflect gently that the science is not simple, that splitting water requires catalysts, materials that can coax a reaction to happen efficiently, and you imagine the delicate search for such catalysts, metals like platinum shining with promise, but costly, cobalt and manganese echoing the enzymes of plants, newer alloys and nanostructures offering possibilities, each one an attempt to find a key that fits the lock of water's bonds. And you see the scientists at their work, patient, persistent, adjusting, testing, failing, succeeding, all of it part of the long meditation of discovery. You let yourself drift into the scale of it. Tiny bubbles rising in a glass beaker in a lab, then multiplied across panels, then across cities, then across nations, until humanity as a whole breathes differently, no longer tied to smoke and flame, but to bubbles and light, no longer bound to passive fossil sunlight, but open to the presence of living sunlight. You pause here, breathing gently, and notice how calm it feels to imagine such a future where the sun's energy is stored not only in wires but in molecules, in fuels that are clean and abundant, where energy can be carried like water, shared like air, held for when it is needed. You recognize, too, that plants are not the only teachers here, that even the smallest algae and bacteria have long practiced variations of this, storing sunlight as chemical bonds, surviving to the night with energy captured in the day. And you feel humility again, remembering that humanity's greatest breakthroughs often come from listening to the smallest voices of nature. You breathe once more, your chest rising and falling slowly, and you sense the importance of this story, that to split water and store the sun is not only a technical achievement, but a symbolic one, a return to balance, a remembering that energy need not be taken destructively, that it can be received and held with grace, with continuity, with renewal. You let your body grow heavier with rest as you drift toward the close of this chapter, and as you do, you feel the story turning again toward the next layer of detail, toward the tiny scales where matter itself becomes a landscape, where nanostructures and quantum dots shimmer like forests too small to see, catching light with new precision, dancing with photons in ways leaves have always known. And so your last thought here is a soft question. If splitting water and storing the sun is the great goal, what hidden architectures of the microscopic world are waiting to help? What dances of nanostructure and light are quietly unfolding, ready to be learned? You breathe slowly now, carry with you the image of water splitting into bubbles of light-borne fuel, and as you sink deeper into calm, your mind begins to wander into smaller worlds, places so tiny that even your eyes cannot see them, landscapes built not of mountains or rivers, but of atoms arranged in delicate patterns. And here unfolds the story of nanostructures, of materials engineered at the smallest scales to capture sunlight with new elegance. And as you imagine them, you see that. They are like forests in miniature, shimmering groves too small for footsteps, yet vast enough to change the course of energy on Earth. You picture nanowires, thin as threads of light, standing upright like trees in a microscopic meadow, each one catching photons as they fall, guiding electrons along their slender trunks. And you imagine quantum dots, tiny crystals that glow with colors depending on their size, that so small they seem like specks of starlight, each one tuned to absorb or emit light at specific wavelengths, each one a note in the great song of the spectrum. And you sense how wondrous it is that by shaping matter, at such scales, humans can bend the flow of light, guiding it more carefully, capturing more of its power, turning more of its whisper into usable energy. You rest in this vision, noticing how these structures dance not in chaos, but in rhythm, electrons flowing like currents through wires, photons absorbed and re-emitted like pulses in music. And you realize that this is why they're called quantum, because here the rules of reality shift. Particles acting like waves, waves behaving like particles, energy moving in steps so delicate and precise that it feels more like choreography than machinery. You breathe again, imagining scientists at work in clean rooms, crafting these nanostructures with lasers and chemicals, arranging atoms as though painting on invisible canvases. And though the process is intricate, the goal remains simple: to capture light more completely, to waste less, to mimic the perfection of a leaf's pigments, but materials that can be scaled, that can be built into panels, devices, and fuels. You let yourself drift to examples. Solar cells coated with nanowires that trap light instead of reflecting it, making panels darker, more absorbent, more efficient. Quantum dot cells that adjust catch not only visible light, but infrared too, expanding the harvest beyond what silicon alone can do. Plasmonic nanoparticles shimmering like gold dust, concentrating light at the nanoscale to drive reactions more powerfully, like tiny lenses focusing the sun's fire into drops of usable energy. You rest in the beauty of these images, the way they seem both futuristic and natural, like discovering new kinds of leaves grown from matter itself. Engineered yet inspired, artificial yet organic in their logic. You reflect gently that nanostructures are not only about catching more light, but also about controlling how energy flows, guiding electrons smoothly, preventing losses, keeping the dance in step. And this too echoes nature, for within a leaf electrons are passed along with astonishing precision, losing almost nothing, while human devices still struggle with inefficiencies, with leaks of energy, with roughness where there should be grace. And so these nanostructures are steps toward grace, steps toward alignment with the elegance of photosynthesis. You breathe again, and as your body sinks heavier, you imagine what it might feel like to shrink down, to walk among these forests of nanowires, to see the sun above but filtered through a lattice of matter, each photon caught, each one guided, none wasted. And in this imagination you feel comfort, for it shows that even in the smallest scales, the story of light continues, the same story told differently, the same dance set to a new rhythm. You allow your thoughts to wander further, toward how these discoveries might shape the future. Solar panels that are lighter, cheaper, flexible, woven into fabrics, painted onto walls, embedded into windows, turning every surface into a harvester of light. Artificial photosynthetic devices where nanostructures serve as catalysts, splitting water more efficiently, storing energy more gracefully. Batteries and fuels powered by reactions that unfold at the nanoscale, where energy slips through. Barriers as easily as breath through lungs. You feel a soft hope rising in you, not hurried, not urgent, but steady, a recognition that by looking inward to the smallest scales, humanity may find ways to live more outwardly in harmony, that by learning the dance of nanostructures, the planet itself may one day move with more balance. You pause here, resting in this rhythm, and you let the thought expand beyond technology, beyond science, into metaphor, that perhaps your own life too is built from nanostructures, from tiny patterns of thought, breath, heartbeat, cell, each one dancing invisibly, each one shaping the larger flow of your existence. And in this awareness you find calm, knowing that the small is never separate from the great, that the invisible dance sustains a visible world. You breathe once more, slowly, and feel the story begin to turn again, for if nanostructures catch light with new precision, the question remains of what to do with it, how to hold it, how to share it. And so your last thought here is a gentle curiosity. If energy can be captured more fully, then how can it be stored more safely? How can fragility of energy be balanced with the resilience of life? You breathe slowly now, carry with you the shimmering image of nanowires and quantum dots dancing with sunlight. And as you sink deeper into calm, you begin to notice that energy, for all its abundance, is not always easy to keep, not always simple to hold. For though photons pour endlessly from the sun, once they are caught, they must be carried, stored, and shared. And this is where fragility enters the story. The delicate challenge of keeping energy safe without letting it slip away. A challenge that nature has solved with sugars and bonds, but that humanity still struggles within wires and batteries, fuels and grids. And as you reflect on this, you realize that energy itself is like water cupped in hands, always seeking to escape, always moving toward balance, always flowing from where it is concentrated to where it is not. And so to store energy is to pause this flow, to hold the restless in stillness. And that is never easy. You let your mind drift gently through examples. A battery, for instance, a small box of stored potential, filled with chemicals arranged so that electrons can be released on demand. And you see how fragile it is, how it can be drained, how it degrades with time, how its capacity is finite. And yet how remarkable it is that within such a small space lies enough energy to light lamps, power voices, move vehicles, and carry dreams. Or you imagine hydrogen fuel, a gas so light it escapes any. Opening, needing careful vessels and pressure, delicate seals, yet carrying within it the potential to store the sun's fire and bonds that can be broken later. Or you picture the electrical grid itself, a vast web of wires stretched across continents, carrying energy like veins carry blood. And yet how easily it can falter, how a storm or overload can cause blackouts, showing again how fragile energy truly is when it is gathered into human systems. You breathe again, slower, calmer, and you realize that this fragility is not weakness, but a reminder of balance, a reminder that energy is always in motion, always seeking release, and that the art of storage is the art of harmony, of designing vessels, molecules, and networks that align with this nature instead of fighting it. You picture plants again, holding energy not as electricity but as glucose, a sugar stable enough to last, simple enough to move through tissues, flexible enough to be stored in roots, fruits, seeds, and you realize how wise this method is, how energy bound in chemical bonds is less fragile than energy left in pure form, and you sense why scientists seek to imitate this too, seeking fuels that can hold sunlight with similar stability. You drift further into the fragility of energy in ecosystems, remembering how even natural flows can collapse if balance is lost, how too little or too much sunlight, water, or nutrients can disrupt cycles. And you sense the lesson again. Energy must be not only caught but managed, shared wisely, balanced within limits. And in this awareness you feel a calm respect for the subtlety of the task. You let your thoughts wander to the future. Vast batteries built of new chemistries, from lithium to sodium to iron, designed to store the day's light for night's use. Fuels made from hydrogen, ammonia, or even artificial hydrocarbons, holding energy in bonds that can be carried across oceans, smart grids that flow like rivers, distributing energy not rigidly but flexibly, moving it where it is needed, protecting against collapse. And you see in these dreams not only technology, but a kind of care, a recognition that to live with the sun is to live with its rhythm, to store not forever but enough to balance abundance with fragility. You pause here, breathing in, breathing out, and you let yourself feel the metaphor within it too, that energy in your own life is fragile, that your strength, your attention, your spirit must also be stored and renewed, not wasted, that rest itself is storage, that sleep itself is how you hold your own light for tomorrow. And in this recognition you find comfort, as if the fragility of energy is not a flaw but a design, reminding you of the need for cycles, for pauses, for replenishment. You rest more deeply, your body heavier, your breath steadier, and you sense the story beginning to turn once again, for the fragility of energy reminds us of balance. Then the next question is how this balance can be sustained not only within molecules and grids, but within life itself, within societies and ecosystems, how technology and biology, energy and ecology can be woven together without breaking, without depleting. And so as you drift toward the next chapter, your last thought here is a gentle one. If energy is fragile, then perhaps the strength lies in balance, in life and technology learning to breathe together. And what does that balance look like when seen from the wide, calm view of the planet itself? You breathe softly now, resting in the awareness that energy, for all its power, is delicate. And as your thoughts drift deep, you begin to sense that this fragility is not a flaw but a reminder, a gentle teaching that energy, like life, must always be balanced. And here the story widens to show how technology and biology, humanity and ecology are not separate but entwined, bound together by the same currents of sunlight, the same cycles of air and water. And so the chapter becomes a meditation on balance, on how life and technology can learn to breathe together without breaking the rhythms of the earth. You imagine the planet from above, a blue and green sphere drifting through darkness, clouds moving softly across its face, and you see two layers at once. The natural layer of forests, rivers, oceans, deserts, and the human layer of cities, roads, machines, grids, each one drawing on the same sunlight, the same oxygen, the same flows of carbon and water. And you realize that the challenge of this century, perhaps of all centuries, is to let these two layers harmonize, to let them coexist not as enemies but as partners. You let your awareness drift to the balance within ecosystems, where every species, every element plays a role, predators keeping prey in check, plants capturing light, fungi recycling matter, rivers carrying nutrients, and you see that nothing is wasted, everything circulates, balance maintained through cycles, and you recognize that technology too can aspire to this, can be designed not as a straight line of extraction and waste, but as a circle of renewal and reuse, flowing like nature does, imitating not only photosynthesis, but the whole ecological dance. You breathe slowly and picture energy systems redesigned in this way. Solar panels feeding grids that store power in batteries, batteries releasing it with precision, excess energy used to split water into fuels. Fuels return to water when burned, cycles instead of endings, flows instead of blocks, and you feel how calm it is to imagine a civilization aligned with the rhythms of day and night, season and cycle. You reflect that balance is not only technical but social, that energy must be shared justly, that access to sunlight, to power, to clean air and water must be offered to all, for imbalance in society mirrors imbalance in ecology, and both create fragility, both threaten collapse. And so the deeper wisdom of photosynthesis is not only in its chemistry, but in its generosity, its willingness to give oxygen freely, sugar freely, energy freely. And you sense that this is a lesson technology must learn: to give without destroying, to sustain while sharing, to support without exhaustion. You drift deeper into this reflection, imagining a city of the future where balance has been remembered, where skyscrapers shimmer with solar skins, where roofs bloom with gardens, where waste flows back into cycles, where energy is caught, stored, and shared with harmony, where technology hums not against nature but within it, like another layer of forest canopy. You pause here, letting this image soothe you, and you recognize that balance begins not only in grand systems but in small choices, in daily rhythms, in how you breathe, eat, move, and rest, each one connected to flows of energy that sustain the whole. You smile softly, realizing that even as you rest now, you are part of this balance, that your sleep is the night side of photosynthesis, your breathing an echo of the planet's lungs, your heartbeat a reminder that technology and life are both sustained by the same fundamental energy transformations. You let your body grow heavier with calm, and you sense that the story is turning again toward a more personal vision, toward how this balance plays out in the lives of people, in the streets of cities, in the rhythms of daily life. And so as the chapter closes, your last thought is a gentle one. If balance is the wisdom of both leaf and civilization, then what might it feel like to walk through a city where sunlight is woven into every wall, every breath, every moment, where the very act of living is powered by harmony with the sun? You breathe slowly now, resting in a vision of balance between life and technology. And as your awareness drifts deeper, you begin to imagine how this balance might feel within the fabric of a city, a place where stone, glass, and steel rise into the sky, where millions of people move in endless patterns of work, rest, and play. And here you see sunlight not only falling on leaves, but on rooftops, walls, streets, and windows, turning the city itself into a living canvas of light, a place where the rhythm of the sun becomes a rhythm of daily life. And you sense how profound it would be if urban spaces could breathe like forests, catching light, storing energy, and sharing it freely. You picture a rooftop first, once bare, now covered with shimmering panels angled toward the sun, glowing faintly as they catch photons, sending currents into the home below, lighting lamps, charging devices, cooking meals, all from the silent rainfall of light above. And you imagine this rooftop multiplied across a neighborhood, across a city, millions of small harvesters forming a great collective canopy, each home like a leaf, each building like a tree, the city transformed into an ecosystem of energy. You drift further and picture windows made of transparent solar glass, each pane quietly absorbing sunlight while still letting the view of sky. And these windows feed the grid, turning walls into sources of power, so that every glance toward the horizon is also a reminder that the building itself is alive with light. You let your thoughts wander the streets lined with lampposts powered by small solar panels, glowing softly through the night with energy captured during the day. Lights that require no wires, no fuel, only the endless rhythm of sun and darkness. And you see how this changes the feel of the city, how it breathes more gently, less tethered to smoke or noise. You pause here, breathing deeper, and you imagine transportation humming with sunlight too, buses, cars, even trains fed by grids woven with solar energy, charging not from stations of oil, but from reservoirs of light, moving people through the city on currents of photons, silent, clean, steady. You reflect that such visions are already forming. solar-powered trams gliding through European streets, electric buses in Asian megacities, small villages lit for the first time by solar microgrids, and you feel a calm joy rise in you, knowing that even now the sun is slowly being woven into the arteries of urban life. You rest deeper in this vision and picture parks designed not only for greenery but for energy, shaded by solar trees, tall sculpted structures whose branches are panels, offering shade to people while capturing energy for the grid, blending art, function, and ecology into a single gesture, and you sense how beautiful this would be, a reminder that design can be both practical and poetic. You let your awareness drift to the quiet detail of how energy flows through such a city, how daytime surplus is stored in vast batteries, how evening meals are cooked with the memory of the day's light, how late-night walkers stroll through streets lit by photons that left the sun 8 minutes earlier, how every action becomes part of the sun story. And this thought soothes you, for it shows a city not as a burden on the planet, but as a participant in its cycles. You breathe once more slowly, and imagine yourself walking through the city, walls gleaming softly, air clean, trees planted between towers, people moving calmly, their lives lit by sunlight caught and shared. And as you walk, you feel no separation between nature and structure, for the two hum together in harmony. And you realize that this is a dream of sunlight in the city, not only efficiency but serenity, not only power but peace. You pause here, your body heavy, your breath steady, and you sense the story turning again. For if sunlight can weave itself into the fabric of cities, then what does this mean for planet as a whole? What does it mean for climate, for air, for the great cycles of Earth? And so your last thought for this chapter is a gentle one. If cities themselves can shine like leaves, then perhaps the planet, too, can breathe more freely. Perhaps sunlight itself can help restore the balance of air, the planetary breath that carries life across oceans and forests. You breathe slowly now. Carry with you the glow of cities shimmering like living forests of glass and steel. And as your awareness drifts deeper, you begin to sense that what happens on rooftops and in streets is only part of a larger rhythm. For beyond the scale of buildings and grids lies the breath of the entire planet, the great exchange of gases between air, ocean, forest, and life, a rhythm so vast that it has continued for billions of years, and yet so intimate that it is present in every breath you take. And you realize that sunlight does more than power cells or panels. It maintains a balance of air itself, the fragile atmosphere that wraps the earth like a thin veil, protecting and sustaining, regulating climate, shaping weather, and carrying the oxygen and carbon dioxide that link every creature together. You let your imagination rise outward, as though floating above the earth, and you see the blue planet turning in space, clouds drifting like breath across its surface, forests pulsing with photosynthesis, oceans shimmering with phytoplankton, and every second, countless molecules of carbon dioxide are drawn down by leaves, countless molecules of oxygen released back, and the whole atmosphere swells and softens like the chest of a sleeping being, the earth itself alive with breath. You drift gently into the thought that this planetary breath is not static but cyclical, expanding and contracting with the seasons, more oxygen exhaled in northern summers when forests leaf out, more carbon return in winters when leaves fall and decay, a rhythm so large it is measuring the till of the earth and the turning of the year, and yet this rhythm touches you. For the air you inhale tonight carries that seasonal signature, carrying with it the story of forests you may never see. You breathe again more slowly, and you realize that this balance has always been fragile, shaped not only by life but by climate, geology, volcanoes, oceans, and that in your lifetime it has become more fragile still, as human industry has poured carbon back into the air faster than forests and oceans can absorb, tipping the balance, thickening the veil with gases that trap heat, warming the planet, shifting winds, melting ice, and so the planetary breath grows heavier, labored, uneven. You rest in this awareness without fear, feeling only a quiet respect for the delicacy of the system, and you reflect that the same sunlight that powers photosynthesis and fuels solar panels is also the key to healing, that by leaning back into light instead of fire, into renewal instead of extraction, humanity can help steady the breath again, ease an imbalance. You imagine vast reforestation, new green lungs spreading across degraded lands, oceans cared for so that phytoplankton can thrive, cities running on sunlight so that fewer fossil fires pour smoke in the air, and slowly the breath of the planet steadies, oxygen and carbon dioxide finding balance again, air clearing, climate calming, the planetary chest rising and falling more easily once more. You pause here, letting this image soothe you, and you reflect on how intimate this is, that the air entering your lungs is not only planetary but personal, that each inhale carries oxygen atoms that may have been exhaled by a tree an ocean away, by a person across the world, by a creature long gone. For the molecules circulate endlessly, binding all life together in a shared respiration. And you realize that to breathe is to participate in the planetary rhythm, to join the earth in its endless meditation. You let your awareness soften further, sensing how this planetary breath is also a planetary voice, carrying messages of change, warning through storms and seasons when the balance is strained, whispering through clear skies and gentle winds when harmony is restored. And you realize that listening to this breath is part of learning to live with the planet, to pay attention to its exhale and inhale, to its warmth and its chill, to its cycles of renewal. You breathe again, your chest rising and falling slowly, and you sense the story turning. For the breath of the planet is sustained by sunlight and photosynthesis. Then perhaps the next question is what lies beyond. What happens when humanity carries this breath into space? When sunlight is harvested not only on Earth but on other worlds. And so your last thought for this chapter is a gentle one. If the Earth itself breathes because of light, what might it mean to carry this breath to Mars, to moons, to the far distances, to create new rhythms of oxygen and fuel where none exists yet? You breathe slowly now, resting in the vision of the Earth as a living lung exhaling into the vast silence of space. And as your awareness drifts deeper, you begin to sense how the story of light might extend beyond this planet, how the same sun that powers leaves and panels could guide humanity as it reaches for other worlds. And this thought opens softly, not with urgency but with wonder, a meditation on what it would mean to carry photosynthesis, solar energy and the breath of the planet, into realms where no forests grow, where no seas shimmer, where sunlight falls differently or not all. And you let yourself picture first the red deserts of Mars, its thin air and distant sun, and you imagine panels shimmering across its surface, catching weaker photons but still enough to power machines, still enough to support the first fragile human settlements. And then you imagine something bolder, artificial leaves and domes, splitting water ice into oxygen to breathe and hydrogen to burn, creating green lungs where none existed, turning the silent planet into a place that whispers with life. You drift further and picture the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn, worlds where sunlight is faint but still present, and their two solar panels might stretch, though smaller, weaker, supplemented by other sources, yet still guided by the principle of catching photons, still echoing the leaf even at the edges of the sun's reach. And then you imagine the far voyages, ships crossing interstellar space, carrying reactors powered not by fossil fire, but by light stored in fuels, artificial. Photosynthesis carried like a seed into the dark, sustaining life between stars. You pause here, breathing in, breathing out, and you realize that beyond Earth sunlight becomes more fragile, weaker, more precious. And so the wisdom of storage, of balance, becomes even more vital. And this awareness softens you, for it shows that even among the stars the lessons of a leaf remain true. You let your mind wander in the thought of light beyond the sun, energy caught not only from our star but from others, from starlight faint but steady, from cosmic rays, even from artificial sources. And you sense that the essence remains the same. Photons caught, electrons moved, bonds formed, energy shared, the same dance carried into new theaters. You drift deeper into calm and reflect that this dream is not only technical but poetic, that to carry photosynthesis to another world is to carry a piece of Earth itself, to carry the breath of the planet outward, to let other landscapes inhale oxygen and exhale life for first time. And you see this as a continuation, not an escape, a spreading of the same rhythm that has sustained Earth for billions of years. You breathe again, your chest rising and falling slowly, and you feel that this vision expands your sense of belonging, reminding you that you are not only of Earth but the cosmos, that the photons you catch in your eyes each day come from a star among countless stars, that the energy flowing through your cells is part of universal law, a pattern that can unfold anywhere, given time, given care, given balance. You rest in this awareness, your body heavy, your thoughts quiet, and you sense the story begin to turn once again toward a closing reflection, toward the eternal cycle of light that binds stars, leaves, and cities together. And so your last thought for this chapter is a gentle one. If sunlight can be carried beyond Earth, then perhaps the true journey is not outward but inward, to realize that wherever you go, you carry the eternal garden within you, a memory of the leaf, a memory of the sun whispering still. You breathe slowly now, feeling the vastness of the journey behind you. From the first whisper of sunlight to the green alchemy of leaves, through crystals and cities, through the breath of the planet, and even beyond Earth into the red deserts of Mars. And as your body grows heavier, more restful, you realize that all these stories converge in one final reflection, the vision of an eternal garden, a garden not bound to one place or time, but woven into the very fabric of the cosmos, where light, matter, and life continue their quiet conversation forever. You imagine this garden first on Earth, where forests rise and fall with the seasons, where every leaf is a harvester light, every blade of grass a small solar collector, every breath of wind stirred by the sun's heat. And here the garden is endless, not in size but in cycle, each day renewed by dawn, each night softened by rest, each generation born from the energy captured before. And you feel within this a deep comfort, the reassurance that life is not a fragile accident but a pattern, woven into light itself. You let your awareness drift outward, seeing the eternal garden as more than trees and rivers, as the networks of panels spread across deserts, the rooftops shimmering in cities, the artificial leaves bubbling oxygen in laboratories. And you realize that humanity too is planting its own forms of garden, mechanical yet alive with purpose, extending the same principle of photosynthesis into new shapes, new designs, new rhythms. And though they look different from forests, they too are fields of light. They too are part of the eternal harvest. You pause here, letting this soothe you, and you sense how the eternal garden is not only physical but spiritual, for it invites you to see yourself as part of its cycles, to see your breath as one of its leaves, your thoughts as one of its blooms, your body as one of its branches, all powered by sunlight transformed into energy within you. And you feel how tender and profound this is, that you are not separate but an expression of the same garden, that you are a flowering of the sun's gift. You drift deeper, imagining this garden extending beyond Earth, carried by human hands other planets, where domes shimmer with panels, where artificial leaves split ice into breath, where settlements inhale light and exhale life. And you realize that the eternal garden is portable, not tied to soil or sky, but carried in knowledge, in seeds, in the memory of photosynthesis itself, ready to bloom wherever sunlight falls. You breathe again slowly, and you see that even in the farthest darkness, even in the silence between stars, the pattern continues, for light in all its forms will always find surfaces to touch, particles to move, bonds to form, and life, if given a chance, will always root itself in those gifts, turning energy into structure, into motion, into song. You let yourself rest fully in this vision, knowing that though your own life is finite, the garden is eternal, that though a leaf may fall, the forest continues, though a panel may fade, the sun endures, though generations pass, the rhythm of light and life flows on, unchanged in essence, renewed in form. You feel the weight of this comfort, gentle and steady, like a blanket of dusk, and as you drift towards sleep, you realize that the eternal garden is both outside and within you, that every heartbeat is powered by the same photons that left the sun 8 minutes ago, that every breath is shared with forests and oceans, that every thought is a flowering of light. You pause in this awareness, breathing slowly, and let the story close not as an ending but as a circle, returning to the whisper of sunlight that began it. For the whisper continues always, across leaves, across panels, across planets, across time, an eternal invitation to rest, to breathe, to belong. And so your last thought in this journey is a gentle one. The sun will rise again, the garden will continue, and you, too, are part of an eternal light.